hasn't been easy. Good, bad, or indifferent, it was worth it. Throughout my journey, I had so many inspirations, so many things that made me see things in a different light, even view myself from a different perspective, understanding that I don't have to be just another statistic, that I can seek to be who I want to be, not who they set out for me to be. With that being said, this is my response to the legendary Pedro Pedri's Puerto Rican obituary, Puerto Rican resurrection. Hold up, what's going on? We've let too much time pass. It's been going on for far too long, struggling just to survive. Things seem so wrong. We worked, we were always on time. We were never late, just trying to survive. If it wasn't for Juan, Miguel, Milagro, Olga, Manuel, I would still be in denial. All dying for an American dream, waiting for their lottery numbers to hit, the promotion that never came and the system that never gave a fuck from the beginning. So understanding and learning everything they struggled through, why do we continue to keep the cycle going? While screaming, yo soy boricua, pa que tú lo sepa. Please tell me, what good does that do if we continue to contribute to the system that has us where we're at? And I'm not saying you got to be the next Captain Puerto Rico. I'm not saying all that. But let's look at the facts. So from 1493 until 1898, Spain ruled the island of Borinquen. And within that time, we'd had massive genocide. So many people died on both sides. And what do I mean by both sides? Our Afro and Taino side that we could never deny because we hold with so much pride everything they went through just to survive, while the conquistadors took the whole island on a ride, committing so many criminal acts that words can never describe. 1898, here comes big old Tío Sam, el savior de Puerto Rico, decreasing the currency by 40%. Cause who needs to survive when you got Tío Sam's checks by your side? Can't forget about the imposement of citizenship, forcing us to rely, while Tío Sam takes a ride on the road of taxation without representation, and that comes with a lot of exploitation. Oh, what a great nation of which we reside. But what I realize, if you remove us from history, we don't see a future. This is why it's important to understand who is Pedro Albizu Campos, who is Arturo Alfonso Chambre, who is Lolita Lebron, who is Ramon Emeterio Betances, who is Mariana Bracetti, who are the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, who are the Young Lords. All representation of greatness, all in their own right. But we are them and they are us, fighting for the same cause, liberation, self-determination, with no limitations. So we won't be dying, hating the make-believe steaks or the bulletproof rice and beans, or waiting for the supervisor to die to get that promotion. We will die freeing our bodies without having to use physical strength, but by arming ourselves with knowledge and education, not just for now, but for the future. Viva Puerto Rico libre, pa'lante, siempre pa'lante. Top of the afternoon, everybody, salute. We back at it with another Afro-Taino book club. We are going to do the continuation of Puerto Rico and national history. This will be part 5 for us. You can find the previous episodes on YouTube at Afro-Taino88 on YouTube. But without further ado, guys, let's get it going. So we're going to continue where we left off yesterday. We're on chapter 7. That's just the end of the chapter we went yesterday. You can find yesterday's episode on YouTube, Afro-Taino88 on YouTube, and you can catch all the previous lives to the books that we've been listening to. Thank you for the gifts. Thank you for the gifts. Thank you for the love and support. And if this is your first time here, I do believe in socialism, free education, free housing, and free healthcare. So by tapping the screen and sharing this live, it's just showing me a little bit of socialist love and support to be able to get the message out to the masses. Without further ado, before I forget, happy 2025. Happy New Year to everybody. With that being said, like I told you guys, the new year, We are starting to fundraise, so all gift and donations will be going to the Young Lord Back to Borinquen project. We are going from I'm going from May 1st to the 12th. We have schedules down there to be down there from the 2nd to the 10th. So we will be back at the Marco Sanchez Community Center over there in Yabucoa, Puerto Rico, for about a week and a half or so. Keep tapping that screen, keep sharing this live, and keep spreading the word, because we need all the help and support we can get, especially down there in La Isla. Let's get it.
Chapter 7: A Turbulent Decade. The 1930s are often portrayed in Puerto Rico's official history as a decade of crisis. And they were turbulent times indeed. By the 1930s, the archipelago had become, in the words of historian Fernando Pico, a vast sugar plantation. Meanwhile, the Great Depression wreaked havoc on a population for whom trauma had become part of their everyday experience. But the 1930s were also a moment of political effervescence, a time when various groups and individuals began testing out other ways to live. The nation, or at least the essence of what it meant to be Puerto Rican, was once again theorized and reimagined by intellectuals. And while old hegemonies shattered and gave way to new orthodoxies, 19th century national myths continued to hold power. In the southern region of Puerto Rico, a black physician named José Lanause Rolón was thinking about ways to construct those other possibilities. Born in 1893, Lanause Rolón was educated in his hometown of Coamo and became a teacher there. He later traveled to Washington, D.C., received his medical degree from Howard University, and returned to Puerto Rico, where he opened a medical office in the city of Ponce. As a doctor, Lanause Rolón was a distinguished member of Ponce's middle class. He was also a prominent writer and essayist who penned numerous articles in the local press and published his first book, a poemario titled Momentos, Poesías y Cuentos Fantásticos, Moments, Poetry and Fantastic Stories, shortly after returning from Howard University. From 1925 to 1928, he also organized a group that advocated for birth control. He was influenced by neo-Malthusian ideas about population control, then popular in certain working-class circles. In fact, these ideas had been discussed in Puerto Rico since the early 1900s and had advocates that included the anarcho-feminist Luisa Capetillo. For Lanause Rolón, Puerto Rico was overpopulated. Nonetheless, he opposed abortion and extramarital sex. He believed education and access to information would help women, men were exempt, make decisions about their life and health. Sex, on the other hand, did not have to be solely practiced for the sake of reproduction. These ideas, which he published in newspapers and promoted at public events, were compiled in his second book, El mal de los muchos hijos, Polémica sobre el neo-Malthusianismo, The Harm of Many Children, Arguments about Neo-Malthusianism. By the 1930s, however, Lanause Rolón had been radicalized in a different way. In 1932, he published a book that gave a glimpse of the author's fiery and combative ideas, Por los caminos de la violencia, la idea comunista, On the Paths of Violence, the communist idea. For Lanause Rolón, Russia was an example to follow, a beacon of hope. Russians had shown how revolutionary struggle could not be achieved solely through books and writings. Instead, overthrowing the capitalist order also entailed violence. The 1917 Russian Revolution had influenced many radicals in Puerto Rico, including members of the FLT and the Socialist Party. In their congresses, they saluted their Russian comrades and sought to emulate their example. This discourse, however, was quickly toned down because the leaders of both groups were affiliated with the more conservative American Federation of Labor. Both the Socialist Party and the FLT were not homogeneous institutions. Deep divides existed between the leadership and the rank and file, something that caused major splits and tensions in the 1930s. Communist ideas like those promoted by Lanause Rolón began circulating in Puerto Rico in the 1920s. Many intellectuals flirted with them, including Luis Muñoz Marín, the future governor of Puerto Rico. In the 1930s, however, communists were one of the many groups that imagined Puerto Rico otherwise, even if it meant giving their lives to the fight against capitalism or U.S. imperialism. Others used their pens. Others the classroom podium. Others theorized about all of this with wine-stained lips during their evening tertulias. Lanause Rolón was part of a broader black radical tradition in Puerto Rico that took an active part in shaping the lives of many and the history of the archipelago itself. It is a black radical tradition that can be traced back to the actions of maroon communities resisting Spanish colonialism and the revolts of enslaved peoples that haunted colonial administrators in the 19th century.
Listen up.
The erasure of this tradition from historical narratives, however, is not accidental. As anthropologist Michel Rolf Trujillo has noted, silences are always actively produced. Puerto Rican historians have often reproduced without questioning the agreed-upon norms and dominant codes of their times. Yet Lanause Rolón and others like him challenged the elite's patriarchal ideas of who belonged to the nation by incorporating class discourse attentive to the working masses. The following pages trace the ways the idea of the nation was negotiated by working-class intellectuals, revolutionary nationalists, and elite intellectuals. A social and political storm. Puerto Rico's economy depended on its agricultural exports. In the 1920s, however, Puerto Rico did not reap the benefits of the post-World War I era.
Nope.
Sugar continued its steady growth in production, but other crops, such as tobacco, fruit, and coffee, suffered greatly. Behind the economic statistics, people's livelihoods were badly affected as inflation drove up the cost of food and other necessities, while unemployment grew and salaries stagnated. Because of its geographic location, the archipelago's history has also been marked by storms and hurricanes.
Listen.
In the early morning hours of Wednesday, September 12, 1928, the winds began howling, carrying with them torrential rain and pieces of zinc roof that sliced through the night like projectiles. San Felipe was a Category 5 hurricane, with wind gusts estimated at 160 miles per hour or more. It stormed Puerto Rico for about 16 gruesome hours, leaving behind a path of destruction. Some compared the hurricane to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The colonial administration's experience and recent advancements in technology meant a catastrophe like what had happened in San Ciriaco in 1899 was avoided.
Really quick, yo, salute, King, yo, TikTok of the morning. Happy New Year to everybody. Listen, I will be in East Harlem on 116th Street this Sunday, I think from 2 to 5. We're doing an event at the People's Church, celebrating Three Kings Day. So if anybody want to pop out, come show me some love, meet me in person, or come chop it up. I'll be in 111th in Lexington at Young Lord's Way at the People's Church this Sunday. So TikTok, I hope I see you down there, bro. Come with the fam.
San Felipe's death toll was estimated at 312, in comparison to San Ciriaco's more than 3,000. With approximately $50 million in property and infrastructural damages, Hurricane San Felipe only added to the average Puerto Rican's daily misery. The empire of hunger colonized the empty stomachs of Puerto Rico's laboring masses, and Puerto Rico's dependence on the United States created a fatal recipe. The year following San Felipe the New York Stock Exchange collapsed, giving way to the Great Depression. 3 years later, in 1932, at one of the most difficult moments of the Depression, Puerto Rico was hit again by another hurricane, San Ciprián. It left 225 people dead in its wake and caused $30 million in damages. Conditions only worsened for the laboring masses. For example, from 1931 to 1932, the daily wage of a sugarcane worker went from 90 cents to 50 or 60 cents.
Yeah, if you listen to history repeats itself constantly, especially in the Caribbean islands. Like, hurricanes are not foreign to the Caribbean islands, and obviously every time a hurricane impacts, you have political issues, right? You have economic disasters that occur during these times. And I just sit here and I think about it, and it's like, if you know, and we know these issues are ongoing because of the climate and the geographic location where these islands are, why would you have policies and laws that hinder the progression of their economy when it comes to shipping and exporting, knowing that they rely, because this is something that occurs constantly in their homes, to be able to have contact and trade with the outside world to get the resources they need. So when I think about the Jones Act and how it affects Puerto Rico and other U.S. territories, a lot of them are impacted by terrains like hurricanes. So why would we hinder individuals that can potentially try to handle the issues themselves, but yet we hinder them and allow them less access to the outside world to be able to get the resources that they need? Like, even with Hurricane Maria, you had other nations. You had China was outside of the ports in Puerto Rico ready to deliver, tarps and all that the United States would not allow. And it's a tricky situation because not all U.S. territories are impacted by the Jones Act. Depending on what relationship the United States has is depending on how it's going to move with that relationship. So it's crazy when you sit here and think about it, and it's like the constant repetitiveness of history, and especially within the Caribbean islands, and to see those impacts constantly like, hurricanes aren't new to Puerto Ricans. Like, the Taínos wrote about it, they talked about it, they studied it, they understood it, they figured out how to, revolve their agriculture around it, is because it's not new to them.
An amount similar to that of the turn of the century. Meanwhile, workers in the tobacco sector earned about $1.27 weekly for 30 hours of work. In the needlework industry, which was dominated by women, workers received about $3.32 per week if they worked in a factory. Most, however, did not work in factories, but in their own houses, where they earned even less. The local government's reaction to the situation in Puerto Rico was underwhelming. Meanwhile, the U.S. government sought to merely protect their economic interests in the archipelago. Alleviating poverty and rampant social ills was not seen as a priority. As the Depression took its toll, the United States sent a new governor to Puerto Rico. Theodore Roosevelt Jr., son of former President Theodore Teddy Roosevelt, arrived in early 1929 and sought to understand Puerto Rican culture, something that previous governors had not done. He prided himself on the rustic Spanish he learned while in office, and even nicknamed himself the Jíbaro de la Fortaleza, peasant in the governor's mansion. Roosevelt Jr. went to work fundraising among private donors, founding a hospital for tuberculosis patients, and creating Puerto Rico's Department of Labor, led by Prudencio Rivera Martinez, one of the founding members of the FLT and the Socialist Party. In 1930, the U.S. government ordered a study from the Brookings Institution, which eventually became titled Puerto Rico and Its Problems. The report documented the precarious existence of the majority of Puerto Ricans. The median annual income for peasant families was $250. Further, malnutrition caused 43.9% of deaths due to diarrhea, enteritis, and tuberculosis. Education, however, had improved. By 1930, 97% of urban school-aged children and 40% of those in the countryside attended school. Lack of clothing and families' need for child labor to offset the cost of living were two of the main reasons some did not attend school. A decade later, this was still the case, as my grandmother would often tell me. She only made it to the 4th grade because by then she needed to take care of her younger siblings. In a household of 13 children, they had only one pair of shoes for 2 children. My grandmother went to school in the morning, met her brother at noon to give him her shoes, and he attended class in the afternoon. Before leaving office in 1932 to become the governor of the Philippines, transferred from one U.S. colonial post in the Caribbean to another in the Pacific, Roosevelt Jr. and Commissioner of Education Jose Padin successfully lobbied to include Puerto Rico within the Smith-Hughes Act. This legislation assigned $105,000 for the creation of vocational schools in Puerto Rico. The Puerto Rican legislature matched it and approved $108,000 for the project. By 1932, there were 23 agricultural vocational centers, 22 domestic economy schools, and a School of Arts and Trades. A coalition between the Republicans and Socialist Party, the Coalición, claimed victory in the 1932 elections. The highly bureaucratized Socialist Party and the creation of alliances with those they had considered their class enemies were unsustainable. The Coalición won the 1936 elections, but internal tensions ripped the Socialist Party apart, and factions within the Coalición also created severe obstacles to passing legislation. In the United States, the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his New Deal program inevitably impacted Puerto Rico as well. While the Coalición won the electoral ticket, the political panorama was vastly more complex. It had different nodes: the colonial governor, elected officials, and federal New Deal programs. In 1933, the Puerto Rico Emergency Relief Administration, or PRERA, was created to distribute food and promote construction projects to ease unemployment. As expected, there was a struggle between the Coalición and the Liberal Party, formerly the Union Party, as to how to distribute funds and manage the program. Furthermore, although the Liberals had lost the elections, they won enough votes to secure key positions, including a Senate seat for Luis Muñoz Marín, the future governor whose political star was rising fast in the 1930s.
The biggest sellout.
Through his contacts in Washington and political networks in Puerto Rico, including those he made as editor of La Democracia, one of the most influential newspapers of the era.
I just want to make a correction. He's the first governor under the United States elected by the people. His father was the first governor elected by the people under Spain a couple of weeks before U.S. invasion. Like, that's what's crazy. He took office, I think, a couple of days later. Like, that's when the United States invaded Puerto Rico. But I just have to make that correction because for me, I feel like that goes to, like, giving the credit to the United States for every fucking thing, whether it's good or bad or whatever. We just have to speak that context in a more clearer content.
Muñoz Marín unofficially became a New Deal emissary to the dismay of coalitionists. Since the War of 1898, Puerto Rico had been put under the War Department's Bureau of Insular Affairs. Now, in 1933, its jurisdiction was transferred to the newly created Division of Insular Territories and Possessions in the Department of Interior, directed by Ernest Greening. His appointment was seen as a victory for the members of the Puerto Rican Liberal Party. In 1935, the Puerto Rican government created a commission to study the archipelago's challenges. It was led by Carlos Chardon, provost at the University of Puerto Rico.
Listen.
Chardon wrote a detailed report about the conditions in the archipelago, along with a plan to address them. The plan identified three main problems: large estates, absentee corporations, and monoculture. It also sought to industrialize Puerto Rico, centralize the public school system, and tend to other developmental needs. After much debate along partisan lines, the plan was not approved. Instead, the U.S. government created the Puerto Rico Reconstruction Administration, or PRRA. The PRRA sought to boost the economy through the creation of public programs and enterprises, including new hydroelectric works, new roads, and an electric infrastructure in the country along with educational programs. The PRRA also invested in a cement company, cooperatives, and 2 sugar mills. While these programs were not entirely successful, by seeking to transform the economy through direct state intervention, they created the ideological and administrative infrastructure that proliferated in the following decade.
Thank you for the follow. Real quick, everybody, let's do me a favor. We got about 30 minutes of this chapter. We at 5.8K. Let's try to get up to 10K, everybody. Let's set the goal to 10K. Let's tap that screen, share this live. Like I said, if this is your first time here, I do believe in socialism, free education, free housing, and free healthcare. So by tapping the screen and sharing this live, it's just helping me reach out to the masses. So do me a favor, just participate, tap that screen. Let's get it.
These ideas were incorporated into the program of the Popular Democratic Party, PPD, the topic of the next chapter. As these changes were taking place, there were large mobilizations among the organized labor movement. The widespread misery of the laboring masses pushed them to demand better living conditions and salaries, not only of the government and their bosses, but also of their labor unions. By the 1930s, the FLT dominated the world of unions, acquiring political power that would have been unimaginable to those who created it in 1899. While often unacknowledged in traditional historical narratives, the actions of the FLT directly challenged the colonial administration of Puerto Rico. Strikes and militant labor actions provided a space for working-class individuals to enact new forms of solidarity and to think about different forms of liberation, even if only briefly. In the first 5 years of the 1930s, there were dozens of strikes in which more than 60,000 workers demanded better salaries and living conditions. Unionized and non-unionized workers from different sectors went on strike and closed their workshops and factories, or stood up in their living room workspaces. Needle workers, sugarcane workers, taxi drivers, and tobacco workers were some of those who defied their employers and made the elite tremble with signs that demonstrated the simplicity of their demands. We are not asking for the sky. These mobilizations not only demonstrated workers' militancy, but were a testament to the fragility of the FLT's control over the organized labor movement. By the 1930s, there was clear discontent over the divide between labor leaders and the rank and file. This was accentuated by the coalitions and alliances the Socialist Party made with Republicans. In the 1920s, some aging labor leaders warned against bureaucratization and the infiltration of white-collar workers into their ranks. Labor leader Prudencio Rivera Martinez, who became Puerto Rico's first commissioner of labor in 1932, complained that one rank-and-file worker wrote to him angry because instead of receiving a warm response from Rivera Martinez with the language of camaraderie and solidarity, he had received a letter where he was addressed as usted. But these tensions went beyond formalities and came to a head in 2 major strikes that took place in 1933 and 1934, both of which publicly challenged the FLT and the Socialist Party and delivered blows from which they would never recover. The first was a strike against Rafael Alonso Torres, a self-educated worker who had become one of the labor movement's most important leaders. In 1933, for example, he held 11 official positions between the FLT and Socialist Party, including as their interim president. He was appointed to the University of Puerto Rico's Board of Trustees by Governor Robert H. Gore as a political favor to the coalición with whom he sided. As a result of Alonso Torres's appointment, students at the University of Puerto Rico declared an unprecedented strike that extended to the Mayagüez campus as well as to several high schools across the archipelago. While the government and the Socialist Party first dismissed the students, their cause generated enormous public sympathy, as documented in surveys in the press. For the students, having an ignorant ox, as they often described Alonso Torres as board member, would mean the death of the university. Socialists, by contrast, believed that it was a way of democratizing higher learning. Political parties also capitalized on the strike. For liberals like Luis Muñoz Marín, the moment was ripe to attack the image of the Socialist Party. Rafael Alonso Torres was pressured to resign from the university's Board of Trustees by the governor and his party. Some of its members argued that they had ceded to the students their most powerful weapon, the strike. But the working classes were not ceding anything. In fact, the following year, another powerful strike took place in the sugarcane fields and challenged not only hacendados, but also the FLT's leadership. The FLT's rank and file was growing disillusioned with its leadership's bureaucratization. In 1933, a series of sugarcane strikes led to the creation of a one-year collective bargaining agreement between the FLT's Agricultural Workers Union and the Sugar Corporation's Association of Puerto Rico's Sugar Producers. This agreement, however, had been made behind closed doors and was not discussed or ratified by the rank and file. Further, some of the wages agreed upon were even lower than what workers were currently paid. On Three Kings Day, January 6, 1934, a day after the collective agreement was signed, sugarcane workers in Salinas's Central Aguirre declared a strike. 29 of the 40 sugar centrales in Puerto Rico followed suit. Demoralized by hunger and the lack of support from their labor leaders, they demanded better salaries and working conditions for both men and women, something quite unusual at the time. Although their strike was unsuccessful, their actions dealt a decisive blow to an already fragmented labor federation. While the FLT and the Socialist Party's leadership openly advocated for the annexation of Puerto Rico to the United States, this did not necessarily resonate with their rank and file. On January 11, 1934, for example, striking workers sent a telegram to a non-traditional ally. They asked Pedro Albizu Campos, a Harvard-educated lawyer and leader of the Nationalist Party, to help them lead the strike.
Talk about
While
it.
the alliance between organized labor and the Nationalists was short-lived, it demonstrated the enormous influence of Albizu Campos and deepened the rupture between the laboring masses and the traditional labor movement.
Talk about it.
Winds of resistance, storms of defiance. In 1932, a member of the Nationalist Party handed Pedro Albizu Campos a letter from Cornelius P. Rhodes, a U.S. oncologist residing in Puerto Rico, to one of his colleagues.
Tap that screen, share this live, and keep the F1s locked and loaded, because whenever they bring up Cornelius Rhodes, the language gets a little crazy. So tap that screen, share this live. I appreciate everybody tapping in this afternoon. Happy New Year to everybody. Let's keep it going.
Letter, Rhodes echoed the era's typical xenophobia and racism. He was in Puerto Rico with funding from the Rockefeller Foundation.
Listen.
In the letter, Rhodes argued, "They are beyond doubt the dirtiest, laziest, most degenerate and thievish race of men ever inhabiting this sphere.
Tap that screen.
It makes you sick to inhabit the same island with them. They are even lower than Italians. What the island needs is not public health work, but a tidal wave or something to totally exterminate the population. It might then be livable. I have done my best to further the process of extermination by killing off 8
F1.
and transplanting cancer into several more.
F1.
The latter has not resulted in any fatalities so far. The matter of consideration for the patient's welfare plays no role here. In fact, all physicians take delight in the abuse and torture of the unfortunate subjects." Albizu Campos circulated the letter, which caused immediate public outrage. Its veracity was never confirmed. Rhodes argued that he was joking. His sentiments, however, were familiar to Puerto Ricans. Most knew that they were despised by U.S. officials. Now they could read that they were seen as something to exterminate. Rhodes was removed from his position at the Ashford Hospital, but continued to have a thriving medical career, during which he conducted experiments on human subjects. Albizu Campos became a larger-than-life figure in Puerto Rico. If Bolivar and Haiti had haunted Puerto Rico in the 19th century, Albizu Campos and the Nationalist Party tormented the U.S. government in the 1930s and 1940s. The Nationalist Party had been founded a decade earlier, in 1922. It was created as a response to the Union Party's decision to remove independence from their...
I just want to clarify what he's saying. If you go back, if you guys didn't hear the beginning of the book when he was talking about the Haitian Revolution and how impactful it was to the surrounding islands around it, even the other nations in Latin America, Spain had took that as a major threat. And what they did, since they already lost Santo Domingo around this time, they wanted to make sure no Haitian influence entered Puerto Rico to cause a revolt against Spain. So what they did is that they kind of like locked them out from the rest of the world. You know, they started keeping files, their own version of COINTELPRO at this time. And that always made me wonder, like, why when we study like the revolutionaries, like during the Haitian Revolution and, you know, Simon Boulevard, and you hear things in Cuba, why you never heard of things from Puerto Rico? It's not that things wasn't happening, is that they had it on such a lockdown that it was almost impossible to get anybody in or out of the island for a couple of years due to this, you know, restriction from Spain. But tap that screen, share this live. I appreciate everybody tapping in. And again, if you guys see it up on here, you guys can go to YouTube, AfroTaino88, and you guys can go catch the beginning of the book from the first episode to what we got today. This episode will be uploaded once I finish this live. But let me shut up and let's get back going.
Platform. Its leadership was composed of members of Puerto Rico's cultural and political elite, including José Colicucci, Vicente Hegel Polanco, and José S. Alegría. José S. Alegría's son, Ricardo, became one of the main architects of the 1950s vision of the Puerto Rican nation. Albizu Campos joined the Nationalist Party in 1924. Just over a decade earlier, he had received a scholarship to study at the University of Vermont, but transferred the following year to Harvard University, where he not only finished his undergraduate degree, but also pursued a law degree, which he received in 1921. It was at Harvard that he met his Peruvian wife, Laura Meneses del Carpio. When World War I began, he joined the army, serving until 1919. After joining the Nationalist Party, he was sent on a solidarity mission to Latin America. He spent time in the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Venezuela, Peru, Mexico, and Panama, a formative experience for the young man. 5 months after returning to Puerto Rico from his solidarity tour, Albizu Campos was named the Nationalist Party's president. This appointment transformed the party and Puerto Rican politics. The party had been essentially dormant before it joined the electoral race in the 1932 elections. The results were disastrous. The Nationalist Party received just 5,257 votes, or 1.38% of all ballots cast. After the elections, the Nationalist Party's leadership decided that independence could not be asked for politely through the ballot box, and they abandoned the electoral process altogether. The party instead sought to organize actions that would call international attention to the way that U.S. colonialism impacted Puerto Ricans.
Talk about it.
After 1932, Albizu Campos's discourse became fierier. Unlike traditional politicians, he believed that Puerto Ricans had the right to independence, whether the United States was willing to grant it or not.
Talk about it.
Federal agencies immediately took notice and began surveilling members of the Nationalist Party and other so-called subversives. Tensions between the Nationalist Party and the government came to boil from 1935 to 1939.
Listen to the years.
Albizu Campos had never abandoned the idea of using arms in defense of independence. In 1935, however, a series of events pushed the party to oblige its members to participate in military service.
Really quick, if you want to go in depth a little bit more on like the COINTELPRO, the Carpetas, Pedro Albizu Campos, the Nationalist Party, J. Edgar Hoover, I do have War Against All Puerto Ricans uploaded on my YouTube on Afro Taino 88. It might not be in the video sections. You might have to go to the live sections where it says video, shorts, lives, community. Go to the live section. If you scroll down to the bottom, you will have the entire book of War Against All Puerto Ricans. So if you guys get a chance, if you want to go check that out, go check that out. But let me shut up and let's get back to it.
In a Congress that took place on December 8, 1935.
Oh, no, that's a fact. Listen, when we look at history, I think sometimes we think because the books are black and white and some of the videos are black and white, like we really feel like we're so far detached from that when it was really right there. Like we've progressed so much with technology so fast that we really think a couple of years, like we forget 50, 60 years ago, we still had segregation. You know, we started to integrate schools. Like a lot of people who were suffering through those times are still alive today. You know, let's keep it going, though. Let's tap that screen, share this live, y'all.
Nationalist Party officially advocated.
Look, my grandfather, God rest his soul, he just passed away this year. But he had his own carpetas. You know, he was a part of all of that, too, in his own way. So when I read War Against All Puerto Ricans and I hear this, I know it's not that far detached from me because I look at my grandfather and I hear the stories coming from him. So he's living proof that wasn't that long ago. The impact is still felt today.
For armed struggle to achieve their objectives, a policy decision stemming from the repression and persecution that nationalists then faced.
Really quick, you can catch, I'm trying to be as consistent as I can. I'm a little wishy-washy. Sometimes I do it very consistent, but we try to do this book club every day. I'm trying to find a steady time, but if you can't find me on live, please go to my YouTube. Same name as here, Afro Taino 88. You can go check out the couple of books we did. We did War Against All Puerto Ricans. You can see it right here. We did the Huey P. Newton Reader, and we have the Puerto Rico and National History right here. So when you scroll down, you'll see the other ones that we've done. So if you guys want to check out my YouTube, it's the same name that's on here. You can catch all the books. Like I said, I do believe in socialism, free education, free housing, and free healthcare. So by tapping the screen, sharing this live, y'all just gonna show me a little bit of socialist love and support to be able to get this message out to the masses. Let's get it. I don't know what Afro Taino mean. Huh? Do you really want me to answer that?
Earlier that year, 4 nationalists traveling to the University of Puerto Rico had been accused of plotting to detonate a bomb.
All right, since you want me to tell you why I call myself Afro-Taino is because I have African descent and I have indigenous descent, and I don't call myself anything of Latin or Hispanic because I feel like that aspect of myself has been highlighted way too much. So when I go into a space and I say I'm Afro-Taino, that's what I mean. However you want to interpret it, that's on you. Whatever's in your moral dictionary, dale pa ti. Whatever serves your cup of tea during the day, whatever. But that's why I call myself, and that's how I identify. And if people got a problem with you, then you need to check the European aspect of yourself, because that's a little bit, you know what I mean?
They were intercepted by the police and gunned down. 3 of them died in
Then if I misinterpreted it, mala mia, I apologize. It's 2025. I can admit if I caught something wrong, if I'm wrong. Perdóname.
immediately, and another was badly wounded. A few blocks away, José Santiago Barea, another nationalist, was ambushed by the police. Santiago Barea did throw a bomb before he was arrested and executed. The incident became known as the Rio Piedras Massacre. Albizu Campos blamed police chief Francis Riggs for the men's deaths. To avenge the murders, 2 nationalists, Iram Rosado and Elias Beauchamp, fatally shot Riggs. They were arrested, taken to the police station, and executed in cold blood. It was war. Governor Blanton Winship instructed police officers to shoot to kill when dealing with nationalists. Albizu Campos warned that nationalist blood would be avenged with the same violence. This marked a turning point in the struggle for Puerto Rico's national liberation. While intellectuals had theorized the nation, and Dr. Lanause Rolón had written about the necessity of violence, the nationalist movement was ready to take up arms to attain Puerto Rico's independence. After these events, the Nationalist Party's leadership was arrested and sentenced to federal prison. Calling for the release of their leaders, party members planned to march through the city of Ponce on Palm Sunday, March 21, 1937. Although their permits were denied at the last moment, the nationalists began a peaceful protest. Suddenly, a loud bang was heard.
Yeah, like I said, if you guys want to hear a little bit more details of this time, the 1930s, Pedro Albizu Campos, the Nationalist Party, please go read War Against All Puerto Ricans. It goes a little bit more in depth on that situation. The book is basically based on that time, but it tells you the horrific things that the COINTELPRO, the government, was doing at this time to the Puerto Rican people.
This day, its origin is unknown, and the police proceeded to shoot at the crowd. 21 people died, including men, women, children, and 2 police officers caught in their own crossfire. Hundreds more were wounded. That day has gone down in Puerto Rican history as the Ponce Massacre. The American Civil Liberties Union and the Bar Association of Puerto Rico conducted investigations that ultimately blamed the governor for the massacre. The situation in Puerto Rico became so tense that a bill was drafted in the U.S. Congress by a former friend of Riggs that would have granted Puerto Rico independence. Known as the Tidings Bill, 1936, it proposed a referendum to give Puerto Rico independence, but at an unfavorable financial cost to the archipelago, which would have had to pay high tariff rates.
Really quick, I see somebody put in the comments, Lolita Lebron. You know what? I'll be upset because when I hear a lot of these stories, they don't really mention Lolita Lebron or Blanca Canales or other women who were very prominent in the movement. I just picked this one up a couple of months ago in Puerto Rico. I haven't started yet because I have a whole bookshelf of shit. But this is on my to-do list. This is the next book that I'm actually gonna read. Let me put it to the camera so you guys could get a better look at it. This is definitely on my to-do list ASAP.
It was a measure to punish those who had advocated for independence. The Tidings Bill caused great debate among the political elite. Nationalists supported it, but others, like Luis Muñoz Marin, did not. In fact, In 1936, no less than 3 bills advocating for Puerto Rico's independence were circulating. The Tidings Bill was followed by the Wilbur Cartwright Bill, presented on February 18, 1936, written and drafted.
The reason I mentioned Marin's father before and that he was elected by the people under the Spanish government, it's important to understand that is because his son ran off the same vehicle that his father ran off of. Like, even the whole newspaper outlet, the whole magazine that his father had, that's how he was able to get his message across when he inherited, the company, and he used that as a vessel to be able to lobby to the people what he wanted to lobby to them, the message that he wanted. That's free advertisement. So when you got to put all those pieces of the puzzle together, because if you ask my opinion, right, I don't think he would have ever got to that position if his father didn't let the foundation and gain the trust of the people. Because like I said, when he started his campaigning, he was running basically off the same campaign as his father. Down the line is where he started shifting and altering his views and his decision makings with Puerto Rico. But let's tap the screen, share this live. I really appreciate everybody, for joining the live and showing me some love. Appreciate everybody.
By Luis Muñoz Marin. Another bill was presented by Vito Marcantonio, a friend of the Puerto Rican nationalists and a progressive congressman from New York. These bills were largely ignored by the U.S. Congress.
Mm-hmm.
The nationalists were not the only radical group causing trouble for the U.S. government in the 1930s. On September 23, 1934, the anniversary of the Grito de Lares, another party was formed, the Communist Party of Puerto Rico. Among its members were José Lanause Rolón, the black oncologist from Ponce.
See, he's mentioning the Grito de Lares. This is another book. I'm halfway done with this. I picked this up when I was in Puerto Rico también. This one's a really, really, really good book. Goes a little bit more in depth about Betances and the movement at the time and just everything that was going on. This is a really, really, really good book. Screenshot it if you guys can. Check this out. Let's get back to the book.
The leadership also included lawyers and working-class people like Miguel Bahamonde, Julio Camacho, Estanislao Soler, and Manuel Cofresí Ramírez. The Communist Party's General Secretary, Alberto Sánchez, had spent time in the Soviet Union. The Communist Party immediately allied itself with the Communist International, which meant it had connections to the Soviet government and the USSR. There were some communists in Puerto Rico who disagreed and sought to operate autonomously. While much research is still required, there seems to have been 2 different communist parties operating in the mid-1930s. One was the Communist Party, formed by Lanause Rolón and Sánchez, and the other was the Independent Communist Party, led by Luis Berne Ortiz, a former Nationalist Party member. These 2 factions would eventually merge. The Communist Party did not seek to participate in electoral processes. Instead, they focused their attention on organizing workers. They also excelled in propaganda activities such as publishing newspapers and books and hosting social events. Their newspaper, Verdad, Truth, documented their activities and actions with traditional industrial workers as well as their work organizing unemployed workers, tenants, and other activists. Verdad was also a translation of Pravda, the name of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union's official newspaper. Another radical group that reconfigured the 1930s political arena was Afirmación Socialista, Socialist Affirmation, a splinter group from the Socialist Party that called for Puerto Rico's independence and for a return to the socialist ideas that had led to the party's creation. While small, the group was able to mobilize thousands of workers for political meetings before dissolving. By the end of the 1930s, the Socialist Party was divided. Another party emerged under the leadership of those who had been expelled from the Socialist Party, including Prudencio Rivera Martínez, the Pure Labor Party, as it was called, did not last long and joined two other parties to form the tripartite union. The final blow to traditional politics came with the creation of a new party that emerged from the Liberal Party, the Partido Liberal Neto Auténtico y Completo, Net, Authentic, and Complete Liberal Party. Its name was soon shortened to the catchier Partido Popular Democrático, or PPD. It dominated electoral politics for the next 2 decades. The nation and its intellectuals. By the 1930s, the University of Puerto Rico was a bustling intellectual hub. It served as the center of San Juan and the bridge between the Americas. Intellectuals from the United States, Latin America, and Europe visited the Rio Piedras campus. The press carefully documented lectures, publications, and any other university-related events. The foundation of the Hispanic Studies Department in 1927 was fundamental to the university's transformation during its first 2 decades of existence. Collaborative exchanges with other centers of higher learning also contributed to its development. José Vasconcelos, for example, Mexico's Minister of Education and one of the most respected Latin American intellectuals of his time, visited the university and toured Puerto Rico. In his book, Indología, he wrote about his trip and particularly how impressed he was by Albizu Campos. As the 1933 strike against the nomination of Rafael Alonso Torres to the university's Board of Trustees demonstrated, the university was an important extension of Puerto Rico's political sphere. Intellectuals played a crucial role in shaping discourses that eventually transformed the idea of Puerto Rico itself. In the 19th century, the intellectual elite was dominated by professionals, doctors and lawyers, for example, who also dabbled in intellectual matters.
This is actually another good book on Pedro Albizu Campos. Guys want to check this one out. This is definitely a good book right here. I bought this the People's Forum, I think, last year when I went to, I think one of the elders had a book tour. I bought this one. This one's really good though.
Now there was a new generation of writers, professors, and scholars who began discussing and debating the essence of Puerto Ricanness. When the 1898 occupation took place, many intellectuals sided with the invaders because they understood the United States to be a land of democratic rights and liberties. This allegiance would soon fray as political and intellectual elites understood they were seen as second-class citizens at best. By the 1930s, then, a new ideology began circulating in cafes, university classrooms, and soirees.
What's that?
Hispanismo, an ideology that took pride in Puerto Rico's Hispanic heritage, began to dominate intellectual conversations. Colloquially known as the 30s generation, scholars and writers began seeking answers to the enigma of the Puerto Rican identity. One of the towering figures of this literary generation was Antonio S. Pedreira. He received his undergraduate education in Puerto Rico, his Master of Arts from Columbia University, and his doctoral degree from the University of Madrid.
And if you ask my opinion, this is what contributes to the issue that we have today within Boricuas, within Puerto Ricans, with the identity politics. Just throwing that out there.
A student of Federico de Onís, who created the Hispanic Studies Department at the UPR, Pedreira reshaped the conversation about Puerto Ricanness. Before his death in 1939 at the age of 40, Pedreira helped create the highly influential Índice magazine and published several books that were obligatory reading for anyone seeking to understand Puerto Rican culture in these decades. The most influential of these books, Insularismo, also exemplified the racist and xenophobic tendencies that were prevalent in some of Puerto Rico's intellectual circles. Insularismo's premise was that Puerto Ricans had inherited certain traits from the past, and Puerto Rico was now al garete, or sailing without a destination. For Pedreira, Puerto Ricans inherited docility and backwardness from their black African ancestors. And while he described the Taínos as brave, he also highlighted their fragility. In this racist conceptualization, the only ancestral traits to celebrate were those from white Spaniards and Anglo-Saxon culture.
And this is why I say when I identify as Afro-Taino, is because the European side has been highlighted way too much, and what's neglected is the indigenous and the African components, which really speaks to our culture. We all have differences. Why I say some other people from Latin America, we all have, colonization has impacted all of us differently. In similar ways, but differently. Certain regions were able to preserve certain aspects of themselves more than others. So when we have to have this understanding of constantly erasing who we are to make other people feel better is why we continue to perpetuate the same narratives that we keep fighting against.
The book was highly influential for a generation of scholars who wanted to construct a Puerto Rican identity in contrast to the United States. In this case, Pedreira located Puerto Ricanness in Spanish heritage. Pedreira's project to identify and understand the essence of Puerto Ricanness was not too distant or different from that of the 19th century, when the intellectual elite crafted the racial democracy myth of the great Puerto Rican family as a unifying trope for the Puerto Rican nation. Pedreira, in the 1930s, instructed Puerto Ricans to recognize that their identity was grounded in a historical triad, and he encouraged them to foster their European heritage. By downplaying blackness and indigeneity, his proposal was not a rupture, but a continuation of the tenets of 19th century nation-building discourses.
Listen.
Pedreira, however influential, was not the only intellectual of the 1930s. Others also took part in these conversations and produced books that became landmarks. One of them was Tomás Blanco's Prontuario Histórico de Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico's History Handbook. Others, like Eugenio S. Belaval and Margot Arce de Vázquez, also made important contributions. These books shared an ethos as well as an understanding of historical development. In all, there was a desire to steer the ship that Pedreira condemned for being al garete. Perhaps the past could provide coordinates for a better future. Historical books from this era, for example, sought to uncover a fixed past through primary sources. Understanding the past's shortcomings could help steer Pedreira's ship in the right direction. That is, it could help move society toward progress, civilization, and enlightenment. Of course, all those aspirations were coded in the racist and xenophobic interpretations of the Puerto Rican essence or lack thereof. As these developments were taking place in the world of letters, the University of Puerto Rico, particularly after the university reform of 1942,
Listen up.
began creating new departments and programs. The emerging national discourse, which eventually absorbed the populism of the moment, needed to be legitimized academically as well. The formalization of social sciences and historical studies, for example, took place at the same moment that nationhood was once again being reimagined. The educational system expanded. Private universities opened their doors, and the new political movement overtook the electoral landscape. If the intellectual elite was consumed by Hispanismo in the 1930s, it turned to populism in the war years.
Hold on, what's the next chapter? Let's see where we at. The next chapter is 41 minutes. I don't know. We got 11 people in here. I guess we're going to rock out. Let's do the next chapter just so we can get through this book because we got about 5 hours and 5 minutes left. So the faster we done with this, the faster we can move on to the next book. And it's not like we rushing because like I told you guys, please go check out the YouTube Afro Taino 88 and you can find the catalog of all the books we have gone over. Appreciate everybody. Let's keep tapping that screen. Let's set another goal to 17K. That's another 5K taps. Let's get it going, guys. 41 minutes and 27 seconds left of this chapter.
Chapter 8: The Populist Moment. The political and economic transformations that took place in the 1940s altered Puerto Rico's social fiber. Its agricultural economy was slowly industrializing. Those who had never before left the countryside now ventured into cities with their recently built avenues, parks, and stores. The advent of air travel also facilitated the movement of people from the archipelago to Puerto Rican enclaves in New York, Philadelphia, and New Jersey. A massive literacy and cultural campaign distributed movies, posters, and books in the mountainous communities. The government created cultural organizations that promoted a new conception of history. They sought to break with the past because they thought of themselves as creating a new future. And with the population growth also came a renewed interest in child development. By the 1950s, anything seemed possible. In 1952, the same year that the Commonwealth was created, children experienced a white Christmas. It was imagined to be just like New England, but in the warmest of Caribbean weathers. Doña Felisa Gautier de Benítez, popularly known as Doña Fela, had been one of the architects of the Partido Popular Democrático, or PPD. She rose through the party's ranks and was elected mayor of San Juan in 1946 and served until 1969. Her initial victory was particularly important because it was the first time a woman was elected mayor of any major Latin American city. Her wigs, opulent taste, and somewhat eccentric manners became her trademarks. In 1951, Eastern Airlines inaugurated a flight to Puerto Rico, breaking Pan Am's monopoly on air travel. To best promote their flights, Eastern Airlines joined forces with San Juan's mayor in an unprecedented campaign. They would use one of their planes to bring snow from Vermont and New Hampshire to Puerto Rico. The event took place for the first time in 1952. It was repeated on the same date, January 6th, Three Kings Day, over the next 2 years. The event was part of a series of celebrations, including the giving of gifts to working-class children that took place all over the city commemorating Three Kings Day. According to Doña Fela, it was an opportunity for poor children to experience snow at least once in their lifetime. As was to be expected, things did not go as planned. Nature immediately broke the illusion. The first scheduled snow fight took place in the Luis Muñoz Rivera Park in San Juan.
I'm not gonna lie, this is not the first time that I heard that before, right? And this was for a couple of years they did that, right? They were bringing snow for the people that, but I still don't get the, like, for me that's a waste of money. You know, I don't get it. And then to not understand that the climate, you could barely keep like your pina colada frozen. Like you can't even eat your ice cream. Yo, not for nothing. On a hot enough day, your shoes might melt off your feet. So you really think snow was going to do well in Puerto Rico? That people could really experience it? Like...
As children were impatiently waiting, snow began to melt.
Now, go Google it, Doña Fela. Go. The first governor of San Juan. She was the one who started that little tradition. I don't remember for how long it lasted, but I know they did it for a little while. And for me, yeah, that's a waste of money. Like,
when the snow fight began, it was difficult to distinguish snow from mud. The following year, 1953, the crowd grew weary of waiting for the snow fight to begin. Hundreds of children took the oranges that had been provided as snacks and began a massive, unplanned food fight. Doña Fela and the police officer were both hit in the orange crossfire. The last year the event took place, 1954, the snow
Sorry, correction. Mayor, not governor, mayor. Apologize.
was distributed in small cardboard boxes. Frustrated by the melting snow, children began tearing apart the boxes and using them as projectiles in their imaginary war. The melting snow became a fitting metaphor for the historical moment. The illusion that anything was possible was just that, an illusion. For many who lived through the 1940s and 1950s, however, it seemed as if they were part of a historical transformation. Meanwhile, populism took the political landscape by storm. Political scientists Carlos de la Torre and Cynthia Arnson define populism as a form of governance between the people and the oligarchy. The role of charismatic, personalistic leadership is central, such that the direct or quasi-direct relationship between the leader and the masses preempts and at times overrides the role of institutions in the day-to-day functioning of the government. Puerto Rico was no exception. Similar processes took place in Brazil under Getúlio Vargas and Argentina during Juan Domingo Perón's rule. In Puerto Rico, Luis Muñoz Marín and the PPD incorporated common people into the political sphere while embarking on massive industrialization projects, the promise of which remained unfulfilled. The rise of the Popular Democratic Party. The same year that snow arrived in Puerto Rico, the country became a commonwealth with its own constitution. These transformations did not happen overnight. They had been brewing since the late 1930s when the PPD reshaped Puerto Rican politics. After two members of the Nationalist Party assassinated Puerto Rico's chief of police, Francis Riggs, in 1936, there was growing concern in Washington about the future of Puerto Rico. Ernest Greening, the former editor of The Nation turned administrator of the Puerto Rico Reconstruction Administration, demanded a reaction from Luis Muñoz Marín. Muñoz Marín was quickly climbing the Liberal Party's ranks and becoming a force in local politics. He was also seen as a New Deal emissary in Puerto Rico and had close ties with Roosevelt's administration. It was important for Greening to have Muñoz Marín on record condemning the attack. He declined to do so. Enraged, Greening told him, "I'm afraid you are just another politician. I thought you were something different." Muñoz Marín replied, "Many lives may have to be lost in the liberation of Puerto Rico. I take the long-range view contemplating the destiny of our country." When Greening retorted that he was just contemplating his own destiny, Muñoz Marín answered, "The destiny of Muñoz Marín and the destiny of Puerto Rico are inseparable." Muñoz Marín's words can be interpreted in multiple ways. Perhaps it was cockiness or youthful bravado. It could have been the product of his ambition and the confidence his last name, Muñoz, inspired. He was the son of Luis Muñoz Rivera, one of the best-known politicians at the turn of the century. However his words are interpreted, they prove
And the first elected governor by the people of Puerto Rico under Spain. I don't like when the people keep that out. It's not to glorify Spain, but if you're going to talk about one, you can't talk about one without talking about the other. And I feel like you make it seem like you gave Puerto Rico all this privilege when in reality, Spain was put in a position they were forced to give Puerto Rico and Cuba a little bit more sovereignty and independence, giving them whether they wanted it or not, because Cuba didn't want it, but due to the circumstances of Puerto Rico dealing with that massive shutdown due to the Haitian Revolution, they were a little grateful that they were getting an opportunity to actually vote their own governor in. You know, it may have been under Spain, but when the U.S. got here, they actually took away those rights that Spain had just granted Puerto Rico. Like, if you look at, like I said, 1873, you know, Puerto Rico abolished slavery. I mean, yeah. And then 1898, here comes the fucking United States. How many years difference? So if you understand like the progression, and then to go back and like push them back in time for another 126 years, because if you look at the status, we still under, and we still have to oblige by the United States. Like, people want to always blame the Puerto Rican government, and we talk about corruption today, but the United States is the one who maneuvers all of that. You know, I'm not saying there's not corruption within the Puerto Rican government, but when you really look at the situation in Puerto Rico, especially after Obama, if we talking about, you know, corruption in Puerto Rico after Obama, then the only one who could permit it and allow it is the U.S. government, because after the promesa, Puerto Rico can't just spend $1 or not come up with a receipt for the money that they spend without having to get the approval of the U.S. government. That's like a known fact, you know? But that's just my little spew.
Prophetic. The political party that he helped create and the movement it started shaped contemporaneous political realities and created Puerto Rico's political status, which persists today. As Muñoz Marin's influence grew, tensions emerged and began to create ruptures within the Liberal Party. Some believed that the party should abstain from participating in the 1936 elections because the nationalist attacks would hurt their chances, more so because the party officially advocated for independence. The Tidings Bill, proposed that same year, also created a split within the party.
You know what? As this is playing, I'm going to show y'all my library just so y'all guys get a little insight of some of the books. And How to Hide the Empire, absolutely. I actually have it in my library, but I'm going to let this play and I'm going to just...
While he eventually changed his mind, back then Muñoz Marin favored independence, but argued that the bill was a death sentence for Puerto Rico. Antonio Barceló, the Liberal Party's leader, said that he would accept independence even if they had to starve. Amid these debates, Muñoz Marin and other pro-independence liberals created a group called Acción Social Independentista, Pro-Independence Social Action, 2 months before the 1936 elections. The liberals decided to go to the ballot box, only to be defeated by the Republican Socialist Coalition. The frictions within the Liberal Party were irreparable. In May 1937, the party's executive committee expelled Luis Muñoz Marin from its ranks and declared that La Democracia, the newspaper he edited, was no longer the party's print organ. The following month, Muñoz Marin and a group of collaborators created the Partido Liberal Neto, Auténtico y Completo, which made independence the focus of their platform. By 1938, they had changed their name to Partido Popular Democrático, or PPD. In its origins, the PPD incorporated a social justice rhetoric and declared war on absentee corporations. It borrowed a slogan from the Communist Party, Pan, Tierra y Libertad, bread, land, and liberty. One of its centerpiece demands was the need to expropriate corporations that had not followed the 500-acre law, a piece of early 20th century legislation that sought to limit absentee corporations' power, but was a dead letter. The party attracted people from various social classes, rural peasants, urban professionals, and intellectuals, among others. This, in turn, presented Muñoz Marin and the party's leadership with their first challenge: creating consensus. The organized labor movement provided its first testing ground. Puerto Rico's premier labor federation, the FLT, lost ground in the 1930s. The strikes that took place in 1933 and 1934 damaged their legitimacy. Internal tensions within the Socialist Party also gave way to several splits that led to the creation of the Pure Labor Party.
So a lot of them I have to re-download because I just downloaded Audible. I use Audible for anybody. If anybody, I mean, they don't, you know what I mean, they don't sponsor me, so I don't really advertise them, but I'm giving them enough clout right here. But I do use Audible. I've been collecting these books for like over 4 or 5 years. Most of the books in my library, I have listened to them more than one time. I've played them on this platform throughout the years. It's now that I'm starting to record them and put them on YouTube. But yeah, this is my little book collection that's on Audible. Most of the books that I have on there, I do have the hard copies, and there are hard copy books that I have that are not on Audible. Like a lot of those books from Puerto Rico that I just showed you, none of those are on Audible. But let's get it.
New international labor organizations like the Congress of Industrial Organizations, or CIO, and the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, or ILGWU, also had members in Puerto Rico. Labor militancy increased. There were at least 45 recorded strikes in 1939. The PPD leadership understood the need to attract the labor movement and to take advantage of the tensions within both the FLT and the Socialist Party. As they geared up for the 1940 elections, two of the PPD's founding members, lawyers Ernesto Ramos Antonini and Victor Gutierrez Franqui, represented workers in various court cases. When the Confederación General de Trabajadores, or CGT, was founded in March 1940, they had strong bonds with both the Communist Party and the PPD. Unlike previous labor federations, the CGT understood the question of Puerto Rico's colonial status as intrinsic to their class struggle. This later led to divisions and, eventually, its dissolution. The PPD had an impressive run in the 1940 elections, while the Coalición Party won key positions, like the seat for resident commissioner, a position that had been created in 1902 and had a voice but no vote in the U.S. Congress. The PPD won 10 seats in the Senate, 18 seats in the legislature, and 29 municipalities. The Liberal Party was all but defeated. The gains also gave the PPD legislative power to begin crafting a host of social reforms that launched the party's political hegemony for the next 2 decades.
You know what? I haven't done a video in a while of my updated catalog. So what I'll do is probably sometime in the next couple of days, I'll do a little screen recording of my whole library and I'll post it up there. And maybe I'll start doing, the most comments to the book is what probably going to be the book next after American History Cuba, because that's the next book that I'm doing for sure.
The 1940 elections demonstrated that Muñoz Marín could succeed in attracting various social groups and generate consensus. The challenge was now to do the same within the party's ranks. The PPD, like any political party, was not a monolithic institution, and various political ideologies coexisted within its ranks. In the party's early days, the unifying trope had been independence. In fact, independence was what animated the party's creation. In the early 1940s, however, Muñoz Marín began shifting the discourse. He began focusing on social justice and ameliorating the pressing social ills that affected Puerto Ricans: poverty, lack of education, and landlessness, among others. To advance this agenda and gradually move away from focusing solely on independence, Muñoz Marín needed to consolidate his hegemony within the party. The PPD was founded by a host of politicians and professionals such as Doña Fela, Vicente Heigel Polanco, and Ernesto Ramos Antonini, people who were well known and excelled in their professions or public appointment. However, to be part of the party, Muñoz Marín demanded loyalty. While Muñoz Marín succeeded in generating consensus within the party, it was not without tensions. Ernesto Ramos Antonini's trajectory is perhaps the best example. He was the only person to preside over the party, albeit briefly, during Muñoz Marin's time. Ramos Antonini was a black lawyer with an artistic spirit and a labor-oriented ethos. In 1940, he became officially involved with the labor movement. When the newly created CGT split between those who favored independence and those who sided with the Communist Party, Ramos Antonini led the competing faction that became loyal to the PPD. He also represented Puerto Rican unions in international congresses. But when he referred to himself as Puerto Rico's main labor leader, Muñoz Marin was not pleased. Muñoz Marin, by then governor of Puerto Rico, noted that Puerto Rico's premier labor leader lived in Fortaleza, the governor's mansion.
Listen up.
Tensions only increased within the party's leadership after Muñoz Marin began moving away from independence as the party's goal. With this ideological shift, he abandoned the ideas that had gotten him expelled from the Liberal Party. Instead, he articulated a program reminiscent of his father's early 20th century autonomist ideas. In 1944, another party that championed independence was created by disillusioned PPD members. The Partido Independentista Puertorriqueño, or PIP, was led by Gilberto Concepción de Gracia and became the PPD's main opponent during its first years. Social justice now became the unifying theme of the PPD. While some of its prominent members, like Vicente Heigel Polanco, openly disagreed with Muñoz Marin, they remained loyal after he publicly noted that independence and the PPD's program were incompatible. The 1944 elections also marked a turning point in the PPD's history. The party dominated the legislative branch and won every single election until 1968. Now in power, the PPD began promoting an industrialization program that sought to improve the country's economy and ameliorate its social ills. The New Deal programs had laid the foundations for these transformations. This was facilitated by the appointment of Rexford G. Tugwell as governor of Puerto Rico. Tugwell was a scholar and a planner. A graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, he was a New Dealer who had been appointed to several positions within President Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration.
They're good for the follow.
Some considered him to be too left-leaning and gave him the nickname of Red Rex. His ideas, however, were not that radical. He believed that private industries and individuals had a responsibility to respond to societal needs. Before being appointed governor, Tugwell served as the University of Puerto Rico's provost. Once in office, he aligned with Muñoz Marin and the PPD in its mission to industrialize Puerto Rico. According to geographer Joaquín Villanueva, Tugwell had a vision of a planning board that worked as the fourth power, a theory he developed that suggested that planning was the fourth power alongside the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. The PPD's industrialization program, organized through the Planning Board and the new Banco de Fomento, Development Bank, became known as Operación Manos a la Obra, often translated as Operation Bootstrap. It was an ambitious idea. It sought to promote foreign investment through tax incentives. In practice, however, it heightened Puerto Rico's dependence on the United States.
Absolutely. Listen up.
Tugwell advocated for the appointment of a Puerto Rican to hold the governor's office. Similar to what had happened at the turn of the 20th century, Washington officials debated whether Puerto Ricans were capable of governing themselves. While many agreed that a Puerto Rican should become governor, such a measure was seen as a lukewarm reform by the members of the PPD. The conversations that took place in the U.S. Congress laid the foundation for later debates about Puerto Rico's political status. In 1946, President Harry S. Truman appointed Jesus T. Piñero as the archipelago's first Puerto Rican governor. At the time, he was serving as Puerto Rico's resident commissioner in Washington, D.C., a position he gave up to take the governor's seat. Congress also passed legislation allowing Puerto Ricans to vote for their governor in the upcoming 1948 elections. Until then, Puerto Ricans could only vote for their legislators, senators, and the resident commissioner. Governors had been handpicked in turn by U.S. presidents. It was not a surprise that Luis Muñoz Marín ran and won by a landslide in 1948. He had served as Senate President in 1941, where he was able to pass a comprehensive land reform bill that became a pillar of the PPD's populist policies. Muñoz Marín's electoral victory secured his power in the governor's mansion, where he resided for 16 years. By then, Muñoz Marín and the PPD's ideologues had devised an autonomous formula that would maintain Puerto Rico's relation to the United States while expanding self-governing rights.
Thank you for the follow.
Muñoz Marín succeeded, historian Eileen Finlay has noted, because he understood how to communicate with different groups of people. After World War II, Puerto Rico's colonial status was problematic in terms of the image the United States wanted to project abroad. Social unrest in the archipelago was also seen as a real threat in Washington. The recently created United Nations had a mandate to push for the decolonization of countries throughout what became known as the Third World. Further, Luis Muñoz Marín played the Cold War card early on. He told his contacts in Washington that discontent could make people gravitate toward the Soviet Union. It was in this context that conversations about Puerto Rico's political status began taking place. The PPD advocated for a referendum that would allow Puerto Rican voters to decide whether they wanted to have their own constitution without altering their relationship with the United States. That is, Puerto Rico would be taken off the UN's list of colonies. On July 3, 1950, President Truman signed Law 600. It allowed the Puerto Rican government to hold a referendum to create a new form of self-government. The bill passed with 76% of the votes. The PPD then organized a constitutional assembly composed of 70 members of the PPD, 15 from the Republican Party, and 7 socialists. The PIP abstained. While a minority, the socialists were crucial in incorporating some of their decades-old labor demands into the Constitution. María Libertad Gómez Garriga was the only woman who participated in the Constitutional Assembly. Once Puerto Rico's Constitution was drafted, it was sent to the U.S. Congress for approval. After much deliberation, Congress eliminated the Constitution's Bill of Rights. Modeled after the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Puerto Rican Bill of Rights sought to protect and guarantee free education, secure housing, and employment for everyone. It was one of the most advanced constitutions the international community had ever seen. The U.S. Congress also added a clause retaining the right to revoke any legislation and to approve any amendment. The people of Puerto Rico voted again and ratified the Constitution on March 3, 1952. 4 months later, on July 25, 1952, Puerto Rico's Constitution went into effect. And with it, Puerto Rico officially became a Commonwealth of the United States. While some officials announced the end of colonialism, Congress still held absolute power over the country. The PPD had succeeded in generating a political hegemony. They also created a new political status. Now they needed to craft a new idea of the nation. The cultural nation. The
Really quick, we got 15 minutes left, y'all. So let's end it out with a bang. Let's get to 20K. We at 19K. Let's tap that screen, share this live. And again, if you guys came in late and you want to catch up a little bit, you can go check out the YouTube. Afro Taino 88 is right here in my backdrop. You're going to see a larger collection on the live stream sections. I'm just starting to load them up in the video section. So you got the live section category, and then you got the video section category, but you can find all the lives that we've done, from War Against All Puerto Ricans to the Huey P. Newton Reader to Puerto Rico, a national history, and the catalog is going to get bigger and bigger. So tap that screen, share this live. We got 15 minutes left. Let's get it.
idea of the nation that the PPD articulated was detached from the
Oh, really quick, like I said, if anybody's down in New York City, I will be at the People's Church on 111th Street in Lexington on Sunday, celebrating Three Kings Day with a community event from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. So if anybody want to come down, they're having free clothes, free books for the kids, music, food. So if anybody want to come down, I will be at 111th Street in Lexington Avenue in New York City in El Barrio. So if anybody want to tap in, come see me, come participate in any community festivities. Do me a favor, everybody's welcome.
country's actual political status. Instead, the PPD promoted a shared sense of culture and belonging while romanticizing and idealizing Puerto Rico's rural life. The party's emblem became the jíbaro, rural peasant, wearing a pava, straw hat. This appropriation of the jíbaro was not new. It was built on liberal ideas circulated by elite intellectuals since the 19th century. In this fantasy, the jíbaro was whitened, erasing the black and brown realities of many inland Puerto Ricans.
Yo, Luz, thank you. Happy New Year, sis. Happy New Year. I hope last night was lit for you guys, but Happy New Year to everybody joining the live. Salute to everybody. We leaving last year's problems in the past, and we picking up this year's problems with a positive mentality. Let's tap that screen. Let's end this out with a bang. Let's get it going.
The idea of the nation also reproduced racial democracy myths rooted in the 19th century. During that time, intellectuals honed the idea of the great Puerto Rican family. Now, the state appropriated the 1930s intellectuals' racial triad. Officially, Puerto Ricans were recognized as the product of racial mixture between Spaniards, Taino Indians, and Africans. These discourses, however, highlighted the Spanish ancestry while folklorizing blackness and presenting Taínos as biologically fragile. The racial triad became the emblem of the Instituto de Cultura Puertorriqueña, Institute of Puerto Rican Culture, or ICP.
Please pay attention, because this is the foundation that led the way to a lot of identity politics that we have within the Boricua community. And not for nothing, this is how a lot of identity politics happen within any community, throughout any place. When it comes to colonization and the impact that is left on us, it creates situations and dynamics like this.
Founded on June 21st, 1955. The ICP became the PPD's cultural cornerstone. It was presided over by a moderate, pro-independence intellectual, Ricardo Alegria. The ICP sought to promote new ideas of the nation while also seeking to preserve the past through the creation of museums and archives. It was the first time that Puerto Rico, as literary scholar Catherine Marsh Kennerly notes, had a nation-building process like other Latin American countries. In a lecture delivered at Harvard University, Governor Luis Muñoz Marin outlined what he referred to as Operación Serenidad, Serenity Operation. For Muñoz Marin, industrialization could not succeed without also changing or impacting people's essence. Thus, for any industrial process to be successful, it needed to include a cultural counterpart. To accomplish this, the state needed to create more than museums and archives. Law 372 of 1949 created, among other things, one of the populist government's most ambitious projects, the División de Educación de la Comunidad, Division of Community Education, or DIVETCO. It was a multi-layered grassroots educational program that sought to impact communities. Beyond the massive literacy program, it also promoted the government's new ethos and national ideals. The program consisted of the creation of posters, books, and movies that were distributed throughout Puerto Rico. It aspired to empower communities to generate discussions about multiple topics, ranging from hygiene to labor rights to proper etiquette. DIVETCO's cultural production was created by the generation's brightest artists and intellectuals. New dealers like Jack and Irene Delano captured Puerto Rico's realities through photographs and plastic arts. Meanwhile, local writers and artists, such as René Marquez and Lorenzo Omar, produced books and paintings. They felt as if they were part of a moment of transformation. Just like Doña Fela's snow, anything seemed possible. A social transformation of such magnitude also needed technocrats to lead the government. In most 19th century intellectuals had been educated in Europe. Now the majority of PPD leaders studied in the United States. They understood, however, the need to transform the UPR to serve Puerto Rico's needs. The University Law of 1942, then, consolidated the transformation of the UPR as the premier center of higher learning in Puerto Rico. Jaime Benitez, chancellor of the UPR's main campus in Rio Piedras, was a close ally of Muñoz Marín. During his tenure as chancellor, the UPR system was consolidated into a house of learning. The UPR system also gradually expanded throughout Puerto Rico. Ideologically, however, Benitez understood any interest in the nation as parochial and limiting. Instead, he promoted a Western and Eurocentric approach to the curriculum, emulating the education he had received at the University of Chicago. The UPR became a marker of class mobility for many Puerto Ricans. It afforded students a window to other worlds and possibilities. In 1948, for example, a protest on the Rio Piedras campus shattered the illusion of the PPD's hegemony. After being imprisoned in exile, Pedro Albizu Campos arrived back in Puerto Rico. His presence reinvigorated the Nationalist Party. Students at the UPR were eager to hear Albizu Campos and invited him to campus in 1948. To receive him, a group of students lowered the U.S. flag. Enraged, Jaime Benitez expelled some of the student leaders. He argued that politics had no space in the House of Studies. Students responded with a massive strike against Benitez, forcing him to decree an academic recess. The strike also signaled the beginning of a new period of nationalist mobilizations and renewed militancy. Since nationalism was resurging as a political force in the archipelago, the Puerto Rican Congress approved Law 53 on May 21, 1948. The law made it a felony to encourage or attempt to overthrow, destroy, or paralyze the insular government through force. Known as the Gag Law, it was signed by the governor, but not put into action until 2 years later, when the nationalists attempted to overthrow the Puerto Rican government through an insurrection. It was clear to members of the Nationalist Party that electoral politics would not solve the status question. They also believed that the Constitutional Assembly would only solidify and consolidate Puerto Rico's colonial condition. In 1950, the Nationalists clandestinely organized a military action that was to take place in different parts of the archipelago. On October 30, after a group of nationalists was stopped by the police and caught with weapons and ammunitions, the Nationalist Party decided that it was time to act. Much like what had happened in Lares, there was much passion, but not enough weapons or ammunitions. After all, Pedro Albizu Campos had famously stated that the motherland required valor and sacrifice. The insurrection took place in different municipalities of the island, but one of the most active points was the inland town of Jayuya, where a group led by nationalist leader Blanca Canales attempted to take the town and burn down the police headquarters. In San Juan, a group of nationalists who were supposed to take over the police headquarters in the capital instead decided to drive straight into the governor's mansion.
Really quick, another book that I'm going to recommend for you guys to read. I bought this in Puerto Rico también. Puerto Rico Documentary History. This one goes in depth. This talks about a lot of what was going on with the slavery, the revolts. This speaks a lot about the revolts, the different revolts in Puerto Rico. And this was what really gave me a different perspective when I was really like ignorant on the things that were happening in Puerto Rico, when I felt like, you know, what was going on with Puerto Rico when everybody else was having revolutions. This book really gives you an in-depth insight, you know, on what was going on at that time. But this is a good book.
They were planning to take Luis Muñoz Marin hostage, but the police knew they were coming and ambushed them. Puerto Rico was undergoing a revolutionary moment. To quell the insurrection, the National Guard was activated, and the following day, U.S. Air Forces bombed the town of Utuado. But the bullets were not only felt in Puerto Rico. Two nationalists, Griselio Torresola and Oscar Collazo, attempted to take over the Blair House in Washington, where President Truman was staying, and were killed in the attempt. At the end of the insurrection, which only lasted a few days, there were 27 deaths and 90 gunshot injuries. Many nationalists were arrested, including Pedro Albizu Campos. Neither repression nor the approval of the Puerto Rican Constitution stopped nationalists from attempting to demonstrate against the colonial status of Puerto Rico to the international community. On March 2nd, 1954, 4 nationalists made their way to the U.S. Congress. At 2:20 p.m., the House was discussing a bill to continue the Mexican farm labor program. As the ayes and noes were being counted, Dolores Lolita Lebron unfurled the Puerto Rican flag and shouted, "Viva Puerto Rico Libre!"
Puñeta!
Immediately afterward, several gunshots were fired by the other nationalists, Rafael Cancel Miranda, Irving Flores, and Andrés Figueroa Cordero. 5 congressmen were wounded, but all survived. The nationalists were taken into custody and said that they had planned the attack on George Washington's birthday. According to the Washington Post, the police found a note in Lolita Lebron's bag indicating that she was solely responsible for the incident. "Before God and the world, my blood claims for the independence of Puerto Rico. My life I give for the freedom of my country. This is a cry for victory in our struggle for independence, which for more than half a century has tried to conquer the land that belongs to Puerto Rico. I state forever that the United States of America are betraying the sacred principles of mankind in their continuous subjugation of my country, violating their rights to be a free nation and a free people, in their barbarous torture of our apostle of independence, Don Pedro Albizu Campos." All of the nationalists spent 25 years in prison, except for Andrés Figueroa Cordero, who was released early due to a terminal cancer diagnosis. None of them ever disavowed their actions, and, in fact, said that they would do it again if necessary. The PPD used the gag law and the nationalists' actions to repress the independence movement. Meanwhile, the PPD leadership sought to industrialize the country. They believed that for the industrialization project to be successful, the state could not support everyone. Some people in the government considered Puerto Rico overpopulated. They advocated for the migration of Puerto Ricans to different parts of the Americas, but the scheme was seen as too complicated. The state, then, promoted the migration of Puerto Ricans to the United States, colloquially known as Operación Válvula de Escape, Operation Escape Valve. The Puerto Rican government sponsored migration programs and opened offices abroad to help Puerto Ricans migrate north. The government also used the deepen.
We also correlate with the operation by what he just said, right? The Operation Valve, whatever he just said, with Operation Bootstrap, because it was simultaneously at the same time. Like, that was a continuation of what Operation Bootstrap was doing, and that was also to industrialize Puerto Rico and to depopulate the island so that way they can make room for investors. But we have to understand, without one, there's not another, so we have to understand both concepts, and we do correlate a lot of that mass migration to Operation Bootstrap, but like he just said, it was that Operation Valve that would really push the Puerto Ricans. And then after that, later on in the 50s and the 60s, you had the great Puerto Rican migration that came right after that, which was due to economical factors, which I spoke about it in a video responded to somebody. You guys should go check that out if you haven't checked it out. It's on my TikTok. But let's get back to this. We got 1 minute and 34 seconds left.
Program to produce pamphlets to educate potential migrants about racism in the United States. The industrialization project also triggered internal migration. Thousands of families moved from the countryside to urban centers in search of a better life. Lack of infrastructure pushed many of these migrants into urban slums. Overcrowded communities on the margins of cities such as El Fanguito and La Perla were a testament to the government's failure in housing people. Around this time, the state also sponsored the creation of public housing units known as caseríos. These spaces were also fertile ground for the government's educational program.
The projects.
The PPD administration even created a newspaper by the same name, El Caserío, targeting its residents. Many decided to join the growing diaspora and try their luck abroad. Hundreds of thousands of people migrated without knowing that they were being socially and collectively ejected as part of a calculated government move. In the process, enclaves and communities formed in the Puerto Rican diaspora began to rethink the idea of the nation and, more importantly, who belonged to it.
Bars. Yeah, I appreciate it. That's going to end for the book club today. Many did go back, absolutely. What really messed us up wasn't that migration, was the great migration that happened in the 50s and 60s. And that was due to the economical disparity that was happening continuously on the island. And that migration brought a little bit over 1 million Boricuas. And then when we get here, it's like the economical factors is not even there for us. Like the false promises, like a lot of Boricuas were able to escape and go back after the 50s and the 60s, but the vast majority, they got stuck. You know, that a lot of us got stuck. Even when I look at my family history and, you know, everything that we went through, you know, you don't realize it when you're living through it, but when you study the books and you read and what was going on and the laws and policies and how things aren't set up for you to succeed and survive and thrive in this society, man, it's difficult, you know. Nah, salute to your fam, man. You know, that's a blessing that they were able to go back. You know, man, that's what we all shoot for, right? That's the goal for all of us to go back. And I think that's what, you know, Americans need to understand. You know, we're here due to, you know, political factors, you know, and economical disparity in our countries due to the United States. Like, we don't come here because we don't love where we come from. We come here because of political and economical issues. Just like any migrant comes into this country or goes any other place, you know. That's why I say we got to figure it out, right? As a people, we got to figure it out. You know, I mean, the diaspora is a continuation of the island, and we got to understand that too. Our histories, you know, intertwine and the intersectionalities. But I always like to start it off with my poem and end it with my poem. I'm working on another video for another one of my poems, but we gonna play this one out until we can't play it out no more. Salute to everybody that's tapped that screen. Show me some love, though. If this is your first time hearing it, drop some support emojis in the comments, some hearts, some, celebrations. Happy 2025 to everybody. We got through another book today, or another session today, and that's something to celebrate. Let's keep it going. If I can hit play. My journey these past couple of years hasn't been easy. Good, bad, or indifferent. It was worth it. Throughout my journey, I had so many inspirations, so many things that made me see things in a different light, even view myself from a different perspective, understanding that I don't have to be just another statistic, that I can seek to be who I want to be, not who they set out for me to be. With that being said, this is my response to the legendary Pedro Pedri's Puerto Rican obituary, Puerto Rican resurrection. Tap that screen, y'all. What's going on? We've let too much time pass. It's been going on for far too long, struggling just to survive. Things seem so wrong. We worked. We were always on time. We were never late, just trying to survive. If it wasn't for Juan, Miguel, Milagro, Olga, Manuel, I would still be in denial. All dying for an American dream, waiting for their lottery numbers to hit. The promotion that never came and a system that never gave a fuck from the beginning. So understanding and learning everything they struggled through. Why do we continue to keep the cycle going? While screaming, yo soy boricua, pa que tú lo sepa. Please tell me, what good does that do if we continue to contribute to the system that has us where we're at? And I'm not saying you got to be the next Captain Puerto Rico. I'm not saying all that. But let's look at the facts. So from 1493 until 1898, Spain ruled the island of Borinquen, and within that time, we'd had massive genocide. So many people died on both sides. And what do I mean by both sides? Our Afro and Taino side that we could never deny because we hold with so much pride everything they went through just to survive, while the conquistadors took the whole island on a ride, committing so many criminal acts that words can never describe. 1898, here comes big old Tío Sam, el savior de Puerto Rico, decreasing the currency by 40%. Cause who needs to survive when you got Tío Sam's checks by your side? Can't forget about the imposement of citizenship, forcing us to rely, while Tío Sam takes a ride on the road of taxation without representation, and that comes with a lot of exploitation. Oh, what a great nation of which we reside. But what I realize, if you remove us from history, we don't see a future. This is why it's important to understand who is Pedro Avisu Campos, who is Arturo Alfonso Chambers, who is Lolita Lebron, who is Ramon Emeterio Betances, who is Mariana Bracetti, who are the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, who are the Young Lords. All representation of greatness, all in their own right. But we are them and they are us, fighting for the same cause, liberation, self-determination, with no limitations. So we won't be dying, hating the make-believe steaks or the bulletproof rice and beans, or waiting for the supervisor to die to get that promotion. We will die freeing our bodies without having to use physical strength, but by arming ourselves with knowledge and education, not just for now, but for the future. Viva Puerto Rico libre. Pa'lante, siempre pa'lante. Yeah, I appreciate everybody. Let's get it. Like I said, guys, I appreciate everybody tapping in with me. It's showing me mad love and support. Don't forget, I will be in 111th Street and Lexington Avenue at the People's Church this Sunday for the Three Kings event, celebration community event. We will be down there. We'll be hanging out. Free clothing, free books, free food, music. So, guys, if anybody's in the city, anybody's in el barrio, everybody's welcome to come down. It is a community effort. So please, please do me a favor. If you're down there and you see me, don't hesitate. Stop me. Say hi. Say hi. Show me some love. Politic with me. I love meeting new people in person. This is how we connect, and this is how we build community. And don't forget, we are going down to Puerto Rico. I will be going down there in May. We're going down from the 2nd to the 10th or 11th? The 11th. I'm going to be down there from the 1st to the 12th for the Young Lords Back to Borinquen project. We will be in Yabucoa, Puerto Rico at the Marco Sanchez Community Center. So all gifts and donations donated to my platform will be going to the Young Lords Back to Borinquen project. And if you guys seen the footages in that video where I'm walking around the school, yeah, that's the school. That's the Marco Sanchez Community Center that we've been actually working on for the last 2 years, trying to help them establish it, get it fully up and going. We've been able to open up a couple of rooms with them, help them out, get them situated, but it's a big compound, so it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort from the people. And the biggest issue over there is that we having an issue of depopulation of the island, and a lot of ones that are leaving are the youth. So a lot of ones that get stuck doing the community boots on the ground work, besides like the academias, with the intellectualness, is the seniors. So this is why we gotta, go back, put in our work. I believe in building bridges. Building these type of bridges is what really sets the foundation for a better understanding. And when you have a better understanding, we start understanding that, we are a continuation of one another. There is no separation or division. We have to understand we are a continuation. But with all that said and done, you guys are today's MVPs. Happy 2025. Let's leave the old problems and handle the new problems with a better look on things. Peace, blessing, positivities. I'm going to catch you guys later. One.